The scene of crime is the most important source of evidence when investigating a crime. This source is of a temporary nature which emphasizes the importance to secure, protect and handle it with extreme care. With this video, we aim to handle the problem of procedure at the scene of the crime. No hard and fast rules can be laid down as to how we should act on all scenes of crime, because no two scenes of crime are the same. Although often non-existent, command and control at the scene of crime are extremely important. We would like to give you general guidelines for actions to be taken on serious and extensive scenes of crime, which will ensure that the scene is approached and handled in a professional manner. The concept of contingency planning must not be confused with that of handling of a scene of crime. Handling the scene of crime is only part of the contingency plan. There are several advantages of command and control on the scene of crime. Firstly, the scene of crime will be secured. And secondly, the integrity and originality of evidence and exhibits are consequently guaranteed. Thirdly, thorough and undisturbed investigation can take place on the scene of crime. And fourthly, the coordinated and maximized collecting of exhibits, leads, evidence, arrests, and the use of investigation support resources will be attained. And then, lastly, proper recording of facts and events can take place. There are three types of scenes of crime which can be identified. Firstly, the potential scene of crime is, for example, when a peaceful and orderly march suddenly changes into criminal conduct. Secondly, passive scenes of crime are left behind by a criminal, for example, like a murder scene, like this one. And thirdly, disasters happen, for example, at sea, on land, and in the air. These scenes usually include either ships, trains, or planes. It could also be either industrial disasters or extensive accidents. Every province or area must have a contingency plan. Such a document must make provision for at least the aforementioned scenarios. Mobilization will be determined by the nature of the scene of crime, and planning will have to take into consideration all such actions which will take place on the scene of crime. For the purpose of this video, we will focus on the passive scene of crime. Handling a scene of crime is done in 5 phases, of which 3 will be discussed in this video. And the 5 phases are reporting, activation, scene management, evaluation, and debriefing. It's important that members on duty in charge offices, radio control stations and operational rooms are properly trained in the management of all actions in respect of serious crimes being reported. The success of the subsequent investigation on the scene of crime will, to a large extent, depend on the proficiency of such a member. It's the duty of the station commissioners, but also your own responsibility, to make sure that you've updated telephone lists and duty lists of the institutions and persons whose presence will be required at the scene. As duty officer, you can, after evaluating the matter in hand, decide whether such officers should be informed or not. Crime is normally reported to the charge office or to radio control officers. The speedy recording of full and accurate information is of the utmost importance, because every crime demands its own particular information when it is reported to the police. It's impossible to compile a list for every crime. Let's look now at the particulars of the reporter of our crime scene. Who reported the crime? At what date and time? Where was the crime committed? And where does the reporter or complainant stay? How old is the reporter, and where can he or she be contacted? Where was the reporter calling from? Then the particulars of the actual crime, the type of crime committed, the exact address where crime was committed, street, name of building, number of street, suburb, town, and so forth. When was the crime committed? Present state of danger on the scene of crime. In other cases than our example, there might be riots in progress, people firing at each other, hostages being held, possibility of another bomb, poisonous gas, immediate danger of fire, electricity and telephone facilities at the scene of crime. The particulars of the victim or victims need to be accurate. Find out the number of persons killed or injured, the names and addresses of the victim, the condition of the injured, are they slightly or seriously injured, dead or unconscious? Depending on the circumstances, has first aid been applied and has the ambulance or fire brigade or traffic department been notified? And then finally, the particulars of the suspect. Is the person reporting the crime aware of any suspects? Were they seen by anybody at the scene? And if so, get the name or names and addresses of the suspect or suspects, as well as the place where he or they could be found. Get a description of the clothes of the suspect. Find out if the suspects are armed and with what type of weapon. Get a description of their vehicle and find out if any people are being held hostage. The receiver of the report must immediately dial the number from where the telephone call was made in order to find out whether the situation is real and if this is not a trap. The patrol vehicle nearest to the scene of crime, referred to as the first on-scene member, is notified to go to the scene and the time is recorded. Always remember that no vehicles should proceed to the scene of crime without being ordered to do so. If you are the duty officer, you must act very strictly against such members because they are usually the culprits who trample the scene of crime and obstruct the official activities on the scene. The member who receives the first information of crime now assesses the situation and decides who must be activated at this stage. In the event of injured people or a fire threat, emergency services like the ambulance or the fire brigade are immediately activated. In the event of many people injured, as in the case in a disaster, the relevant hospital staff are alerted beforehand to expect injured people. In the event of an active scene of crime, as in the case with riots, you will notify the public order police duty officer immediately. Lastly, in the event of a potential scene of crime, as in an apparent peaceful march, a strike or any gathering of people, the visible policing duty officer is notified immediately. If justified by the available information, the crime combating and investigation duty officer is also immediately notified. All the available information must be recorded in the occurrence book. The first on-scene member and other members who are so instructed now move swiftly but with care along the shortest route to the scene of crime without exposing themselves to unnecessary road accidents and dangers. They must also keep a lookout for the suspects on their way. Keeping in mind that the police, that means you, are in many cases the target of a trap. You have to be very, very careful. A quick reaction time is essential because the suspects may still be on or near the scene of crime. The injured victims may be in dire need of assistance, witnesses may still be on or near the scene of crime, and weather conditions and other factors may destroy, damage, or change physical evidence. The member who reached the scene first must record the particulars of the message in the pocketbook. He or she must be on the lookout for the suspect or suspects and their vehicle. The scene must be approached with care to avoid damage to or the moving of possible exhibits or leads. Remember that if evidence is tampered with, it cannot be used in court. For this purpose, a route must be used on the scene of the crime. You need to evaluate the situation, which means you have to decide what is the danger factor on the scene and all the other relevant detail. Remember that attention to detail is the golden rule of success in life. The member must immediately render assistance to the injured. If they're unconscious or seriously injured, you have to mark the position where they were found. Their names, addresses, and telephone numbers need to be recorded. You also need record of the name of the ambulance driver as well as the name of the doctor where the injured are taken. An experienced police person must accompany the injured to the doctor or the hospital to see to it that valuable evidence on the clothing is not destroyed and to collect that evidence. Bodies of people who are obviously dead must be left as they were found. Where corpses are found in public view, it should be covered by linen sheets. The body should preferably be left intact. It's critical that you record evidence as correctly as possible for evidence in court. Nobody is to touch or move anything except for the injured. Make sure that you observe and note down all the information. After evaluating the situation, you need to report to the charge office or radio control unit. This must preferably be done by telephone in order to prevent eavesdropping by news reporters and other civilians. Remember not to use the telephone on the scene of the crime, and by avoiding the radio, other members of the service who are in the radio contact will be prevented from going to the scene of the crime out of curiosity and thus trampling evidence. The further successful handling of the scene of crime will totally depend on the comprehensiveness and accuracy of the situation report. Until the crime investigating duty officer arrives, the first on-scene member acts as the crime scene officer. He and his crew, together with other members of the scene, then secure the scene of crime until phase 2 can be implemented. This means that you have to keep relatives and all inquisitive people away from the scene. Everybody who are on the scene of crime must discreetly be moved away from the scene as soon as possible to a place where they can be interviewed properly. Erect chevron tape around the immediate vicinity and do not allow anybody within the cordon, irrespective of rank, until handing over to the crime scene officer. Remember to record full particulars of all witnesses on the scene of the crime. The crime scene officer is now aware of the full particulars of the crime and the situation on the scene of crime. The other role players must now take their position without delay. You now have a tremendous responsibility. In accordance with your assessment of the situation, you must now decide whom to alert. For this purpose, you will be guided by the nature of the crime and the prevailing circumstances on the scene of crime. In the event of a passive crime scene, like a murder or robbery, the following officers on duty are alerted, verbally briefed and supplied with a situation report: crime investigation officer, murder and robbery member, local criminal record center, visible policing duty officer who will be responsible for securing the scene of crime and who will decide whether to notify his station commander. Government mortuary attendants who will ensure that body bags and mortuary vehicles are prepared. The chaplain who will give the necessary support to the family in suitable instances and at the same time ensure that they stay away from the scene of crime. From this point in time, the channels on the police radio will probably be heavily engaged. Unless special provision is made for communication pertaining to the scene of crime, radio silence must be enforced by control for all other users of the channel until further notice is given. In the event of an active scene of crime, the public order policing duty officer must now be alerted. He will order further mobilization if necessary. In the case of a potential scene of crime, the visible policing duty officer and unrest and violent crime unit must be informed. Quick, effective and calm action is the key to success. It's essential for you to act in a professional manner. If you are disorganized, it portrays amateurism. The golden rule is that nobody except the crime scene officer must enter the inner scene. Make sure that so-called experts from the private sector are refused entrance to the scene in order to keep the scene free for the officers to do their duties. Everybody reports to the crime scene officer, who has to note the time of their arrival on the scene. We have already established that the first, most important thing to do at the scene of the crime is to cordon it off with chevron tape. If you are the crime scene officer and this has not been done by the first on-scene officer, it's your responsibility. After securing the scene of crime, you can proceed with making inquiries and investigation in the vicinity of the scene of crime in order to identify witnesses and suspects. Never say or do anything improper on the scene of crime, because the eyes and the ears of the world are focused on you. The public relations officer should be the only person allowed to speak to the press. The task of the crime scene officer will be executed by the duty officer of the crime investigation services unless other directives are given. He also appoints the investigation officer. If necessary, he will alert his area commander. If you are the crime scene officer, you have to wear a red jacket and you pass it on when changing the tour of duty. You are totally in command. Remember that you record the facts accurately, as it can make or break a case should it end up in court. You are the one who decides who is allowed to enter the inner cordon. Unless there are injured persons on the scene, as in the case of our rape victim, no one else but the investigating officer, the local criminal record center, and the forensic science laboratory will be permitted on the scene of crime. It is your responsibility to keep record of all persons who are allowed into the inner cordon. This includes their time of arrival and departure. Only detectives wearing blue jackets are allowed into the inner cordon. It's also your duty to make sure that nobody lifts and handles objects and other potential exhibits. If this does happen, the individual must tell the exhibit officer, who will make a note that the possible exhibit has been moved. Together with the access control officer, you have to decide which route is to be used on the scene. This is done to minimize damage to and disturbance of the scene. Make sure that exhibits are protected against weather conditions like wind and rain. The body of the deceased can only be removed on the authority of the investigating officer. It is the task of the crime scene officer to make sure that bodies are put into body bags before removal in order to prevent contamination. Record the particulars of the driver of the mortuary van as well as the time of departure. Remember that you are the crime scene officer. You are the communication channel between the scene of the crime and people beyond the inner cordon. Together with the investigating officer, you need to decide whether more expert help should be summoned or not. Once all activities on the scene of crime has been finalized, you have to ensure that the scene is cleaned up and all equipment removed. You have to collect all the written crime scene reports from the role players on the scene of crime. Keep your original notes in a safe place should you need to give evidence at a later stage. On the scene of crime, the crime scene officer will be responsible for managing all activities on the scene of crime. He also makes notes of all actions taken. He ensures that all activities take place in a methodical and orderly manner and in accordance with accepted methods of investigation. Members of the local Criminal Record Centre are specially trained in the finer art of investigation on a scene of crime, including forensic fieldwork. These officers are identified by green jackets, and they are responsible for making a video of the scene. After completing their investigation, each member of the LCRC team completes his part of the crime scene report and hands it over to the crime scene officer. This includes the photographer, the video operator, the fingerprint expert, etc. The exhibit officer receives all exhibits found. He checks that it is properly identified with a label or other sticker. He records the name of the member from whom he received the exhibit and exactly where it was found. Exhibits must be photographed and particulars thereof must be entered in the exhibits register of the local Criminal Record Centre. If the forensic result is positive, he retains the exhibits and produces it at the court when the case is heard. If nobody is arrested within 6 months, he hands the exhibits over to the investigating officer for safekeeping. The local Criminal Record Centre is responsible for the collection, packaging and dispatching of the exhibits to the Forensic Science Laboratory. After work copies have been made of the video recording, the original recording is sealed in its unedited form as an exhibit, and its particulars are entered in the video register. Clothing and other personal effects of the deceased and injured persons, which may be of forensic value, must be taken and disposed of in the same manner as other exhibits. Before the local Criminal Record Centre members depart from the scene of crime, they have to report to the investigating officer, and they need to take final actions as may be required by him. Beyond the scene of the crime, the crime scene officer has other duties. For example, at the mortuary, a proper description of the clothing of the deceased must be made and a photo taken. All other exhibits have to be seized and handed over to the exhibit officer. This includes the clothing of the deceased. Photographs must be taken of the body under the supervision of the pathologist. You will need to get affidavits from the ambulance driver and the driver of the mortuary vehicle. Relatives must be taken to the mortuary for identification of the deceased. In the event of many bodies, a video recording of all the deceased are shown to the relatives. You can do this in groups to save time. At the doctor or hospital, you need to get particulars and statements from the injured. Exhibits need to be collected and handed over to the exhibit officer. The seriousness of the injuries need to be reported to the crime scene officer for recording purposes. Each member of the investigation team files affidavits in respect of everything done by him and hand it over to the crime scene officer. Being the duty officer of visible policing is another important task. Let's have a brief look at his duties. He needs to inform the station commissioner of the situation if justified by the circumstances. He needs to mobilize additional staff if needed. He is responsible to secure the scene of the crime until the investigation on the scene is completed. If there is a crowd, he is the person who exercises crowd control, and he needs to secure neighboring areas by intensive visible policing in order to prevent any further crime situations which may arise. He also ensures the proper flow of traffic. We did not establish a joint operational centre for the purpose of this video, but we need to take a look at what is needed at such a centre. The centre is established at the entrance to the outer cordon or as close to it as possible. It should be equipped with radios, folding chairs and tables, a computer, loudspeaker, TV screen and video machine. Also portable telephones, fax machine and tape recorder. Also needed are a map, first aid, video camera, stationery and an occurrence book. A caravan, troop carrier or tent can be used for the purpose of a structure. Make sure that the words operational centre are visibly displayed. The crime scene officer makes sure that the crime scene report is complete and he is responsible for clearing up of the scene. After the investigation is complete, he decides on the lifting of the ban on the use of the particular radio channel. Gruesome crimes are a traumatic experience for relatives of the victim, which usually result in emotional reaction. They are then in great need of moral support and other assistance immediately after the crime, something which is not always available. Precious time of the investigation officer is often wasted in the handling of the situation, apart from the fact that he is not trained to perform such a sensitive task. Chaplains and members of the Institute for Behavioral Science can serve a very useful purpose in this regard. Not only will it be to the advantage of the investigation, but it will also contribute immensely to good relations between the South African Police Service and the community. The chaplain's primary task would be to give moral support to the family and to keep them away from the scene of crime. He also needs to report to the crime scene officer. Let's wrap this up. You can never return to the scene of crime once it has been cleared. What you have missed are most likely lost forever. If you have done your job to the best of your ability, it might mean one less criminal on the streets. What we have given you are guidelines to prevent confusion, which often prevails on the scene of a crime. You can prevent chaos if you follow these guidelines closely.